It's my great pleasure today to welcome you to this session, which is part of the Jisc Assessment and Feedback Programme webinar series, which we've been running to share some of the approaches, outcomes and lessons across a number of themes emerging from the programme. And I'm delighted to be joined by a great team here today who are going to be talking to you about the theme of feed forward. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Peter Chatterton, who is one of the critical friends working with us on the programme, and he'll be able to tell you more and how the session's going to run. So over to you, Peter.
Okay, thanks very much, Marianne. I'm going to be mostly facilitating this session. It's going to be Roller from Dundee University, who's working on the driving forward the Interact project, and Gunter Saunders at Westminster University, who's driving forward the Making Assessment Count project, and they're going to be doing most of the engaging with you. And so perhaps I'd just quickly like if Roller and Gunter could turn on their videos and audios and just say a quick hello.
Hello, Peter and everybody. I'll go first. I'm Gunter Saunders. I work at the University of Westminster, where I'm head of Internet and Education Technology Services. I've been working now for several years on a number of projects under the general umbrella of Making Assessment Count. And I've been, in the last 2-3 years, working very closely with Peter on those projects. And in fact, what he just said about that Roller and I would be doing most of the work in this session isn't quite true, because Peter may have forgotten he's actually going to talk around some of the slides to do with Making Assessment Count. Anyway, I look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Hi everyone, my name is Roller Jawi. I'm a senior lecturer in medical education at the Centre for Medical Education at the University of Dundee. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many of you joining us today. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about our Interact project, which is also just funded, and we're 2 years into it now, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about that and some of the things that we're getting up to here at Dundee.
Okay, thanks, Roller and Gunter. I'm going to ask you probably best to turn your videos off as we're talking, because I think we get better sort of performance of the system when we do that. In terms of the agenda, it's actually fairly simple. First of all, we're going to have a session where Roller and myself and Gunter are going to introduce the various feed-forward approaches and why they're important for engaging students. And then we're going to sort of summarize some of the key institutional experiences of designing and adopting such approaches. And then the last two sections are going to kind of focus on benefits, impact and challenges, and discussions of some of the barriers and enablers for implementing feed-forward approaches. I'll just say as an introduction for myself, it was way back about sort of 7 or 8 years ago when I was working with the University of Hertfordshire blended learning units that this whole issue about feed-forward came up, because everyone was recognizing that assessment of feedback tended to be a very modular approach, and by the time a feedback was given towards the end of a module, everyone had lost the will to live, moved on to the next academic, moved on to the next module, and everything was forgotten about the feedback. So I think all these initiatives are extremely kind of timely. Okay, so the first section is about feed-forward approaches, and I'm going to ask Roller now to talk about the Dundee experience.
Great, thank you, Peter. So as I mentioned already, the Interact project started in August 2011, and it's really based around our postgraduate medical education program, which is composed of a certificate, diploma and master's in medical education. It's a fully distance online program. We do have a face-to-face component as well, but the bulk of our students are distance learners. We have 2,500 students on our course. So there's no deadlines, and it's a rolling enrollment on our program, and so those sorts of things make it really challenging for us, and what we've developed here is trying to address some of those issues and trying to promote feedback dialogue. So just to start with, if we think about it, well, what is feed forward? According to Harry and Timperley, if we look at feedback in general, just to start with, it encapsulates 3 areas. So feedback is about letting students know or helping them to understand what their goals are in terms of learning, where they're at the moment, so how am I going now, where do I want to get to, and how am I going to get there? And it's that third question really that constitutes feed forward. It's that notion of being able to help students to improve their performance in order to achieve their goals. And so you can see already that this can't be about a single assignment, but actually it needs to kind of sequence and link into future assignments and other goals that the students may have. So this was a really important principle for us in the Interact project, and setting it out, what we wanted to do really, we wanted to ensure that we had in our design opportunities for feedback to be used in future assignments. So that was one of our main principles, afford opportunities for feedback to be used in future assignments. One of the big critiques around feedback is that Bood and Malloy make this point that feedback should not be viewed as a single knee-jerk occurrence, so that a student submits an assignment, afterwards the tutor spends a lot of time giving feedback, it's unidirectional, and it ends there. And usually by that point the student has moved on to the next assignment and they don't do anything with that feedback. So there's a lot of wasted time from the tutors but also from the students. And so a programmatic approach is needed, one where you kind of think about overcoming some of the issues around individual modules, and also about silos with each individual assignment seen as its standalone task. So this is what we came up with, and this is our Interact project diagram, and I'll talk you through it. It does look a little bit more onerous than it really is. So what did we do? Well, first we started off by looking at, hopefully you can see my pointer there. So the student, reads the assignment criteria, does the assignment. The first bit of the Interact project, what they do is they have to complete a cover page. And on that cover page that's appended to every assignment they do, they have to self-review their own work against the criteria. They have to tell us how previous feedback has informed this particular assessment. And then they also seek feedback about a particular aspect of their assignment. From there, the assignment is uploaded into Blackboard as per usual. The tutor downloads the assignment. They provide feedback on the cover page based on the different criteria that are set out for each assignment, and these are tailored for every assignment. We answer any questions that specific aspects they want feedback on, and we upload it back into the Grade Center. So that's providing structure and prompting the students to think about previous feedback, how it's informed this assignment, but also giving structure around where the tutor can give feedback. The next step is then that the student downloads their assignment, and from there they have to answer 4 questions pre-populated for every assignment on this wiki. Now we've called it a wiki, it acts as a journal. It's programmatic in that it holds every single piece of assignment that the student has done throughout the program. It's available only to that particular student and the tutors on the program, and the students answer 4 questions, which are, what have I learned from, how did the tutor's feedback match your self-evaluation? What have I learned? What am I going to do differently in the next assignment or, in the future? And is there anything unclear from this feedback? And then the final step in the whole process is this dialogue here. On the wiki, the tutor gets an immediate alert about what the student has written, and they can go in and provide comment, and the dialogue can continue as required. I've noticed just a couple of comments there in the chat. The cover page is completely available for you, and free to modify it as fits your needs, along with any of this other work that we're doing here for this project. So that's the overall what we did for our project. But before we even got to that point, there was something we really needed to do. If we're talking about feed forward, then we need to think about the sequencing of assignments, and we need to think about how one assignment feeds into the next in terms of showing students and actually stretching students and their capabilities. And so what you see here is our old program, and what you see is it was composed of these little modules with one assignment at the end of the module that was a high-stakes summative assessment. And by the time the student got their feedback, they've often moved on to the next module, if not 2 modules down the line. So really, there was no sequencing of feed-forward opportunities, and they could do these units pretty much in any sequence they wanted. So this is our new program now that we've revised, and we've made each module longer, which gives us scope to increase the complexity of assignments if we wanted. We've added in some formative tasks, so students submit a short draft where they get feedback, and then that immediately links on to a summative assignment that they can submit. And also we've thought about the sequencing of these assignments as well, in terms of what are the generic skills that we can give feedback on that can feed on, and also content specific to the module. And we've done that for the 4 modules that they do in the certificate. So this is still within a modular structure, although some of the modules, so for example assessment 1, there's assessment 2, so we're hoping to see some feed forward also not just within modules but across modules, where assessment 2, they should be thinking back to feedback around principles in assessment 1, how they would implement that there, for example. So that's the first step that we did in terms of curriculum mapping, and we were lucky in that it really fit in with the fact that we were doing a curriculum review at the time that we got the project. Now this assessment repository, the repository that I spoke about, it's in Blackboard, and basically the students upload every piece of assignment. It's been under the template which has been pre-populated. We've managed to push that for all our students, and it holds all their work. So as a tutor, I can go in, say I'm marking the 3rd assignment in the 1st module, and I'm thinking, my God, hasn't someone given them feedback about this before? I can go back and look really easily all in the one place and see what has the student received in terms of the feedback. And that's what you see there is actually a quote from one of our tutors saying it's been great being able to see previous feedback so easily. And I'm hoping that it's also very useful for students, because they can look back and see how well they've improved and developed. In terms of the cover page, which I've spoken about already, one particular question that really focuses them in terms of telling us how previous feedback has informed this assignment. And these are examples of some of the comments that students have asked us about, have told us about, on their cover page. So a student says, it made me realize that instead of focusing on a single or a few key teaching principles, I focused on many of them without going into much detail. So they had gotten feedback from their draft assignment to say, actually, you've gone too broad, we need a bit more depth here, cut down your principles. So that was actually specific to that assignment, but then what we saw is in the next assignment where they had to introduce theory, the student mentioned that actually they used that feedback around theory from that 1st assignment in that 2nd one as well. So other examples, feedback that my writing style was agreeable, was reassuring. I appreciated knowing that my use of literature was valid, so I have tried to continue applying the literature to my work. I tried to be careful to define and reference jargon. That's one of my pet hates, and so this student now has taken that on board and kind of I've seen that in future assignments. But we also get, this sort of thing, which was, it was really helpful in writing present assignment, which is very broad and not really engaging with the question. We have 100% completion rate of our cover page, and that's because it's compulsory. Basically, we send the assignment back if the cover page is not completed, unmarked, we send the assignment back, and you only need to do that once and it never happens again. So everyone completes it. So we've managed the quantity thing, and now the next step is really improving their quality around around these issues. And how we're doing that is by showing them how different people have used this question along with the other question around seeking specific feedback in their induction. The next step I mentioned is the reflective wiki, or the journal. So this does a number of things. This helps students to read their, it ensures that we know that they've read their feedback, and B, they've processed it, and it tells us a little bit about what they've understood in terms of the feedback. And the question that asks them, well, how are you going to, what have you learned, and what are you going to do differently in the future? That gives us ideas about, how effective our feedback was, and then we can match that to the question about how did previous feedback inform your assignment. On the next assignment, we can look to see if they actually did what they told us they were going to do, and so we can evidence learning from feedback in future assignments. Now, as you can appreciate, that actually requires a lot of kind of manually going through and having a look to see did they do what they said they did, but it is possible because all the assignments are in the one place in that repository. So the other thing that we had to do in order to make this process work is actually around faculty development. And we had to talk to our staff who are designing assessments around thinking about sequencing of assignments within their own modules, and then looking to the leaders of the program to look at it across modules and the whole program. We had to ensure that tutors are aware of the need for forward-looking feedback. So basically what we did is we audited all the feedback that our tutors are giving and looked to see, are they giving advice about future work? Are they giving action plans? Because we know in the medical education there's been one study that shows that almost 50% of all feedback given lacked an action plan. And if you don't help students to think about ways of how they can improve, then I think we're missing that real feed-forward element. So we had to do better faculty development about feedback, asking questions and that sort of thing. We also needed to prompt students to develop future-oriented plans. I was actually quite shocked because these are postgraduate students who are educators in their own universities, in their own institutions, and doctors, and we got students telling us that in that question on the cover page that said, how did previous feedback inform this assignment? We had students tell us, actually, I haven't had previous feedback. And I knew, this was assignment 3 or 4. No, you have actually had feedback before. So they were seeing it as very compartmentalized. They meant, for this particular assignment, I haven't got feedback yet. So we had to do a little bit of education for the students around, actually, you can't just see them as silos. You have to think about all the feedback that you get in terms of your role as a medical educator and the overall outcomes of the module, but also of the program, where appropriate, obviously, and then use questions and feedback to prompt further learning. So that was around how you give feedback, and promoting dialogue, of course, which is really key. One of the key challenges that we had in implementing this is obviously that feedback has to be timely. And it's not about a fixed time that you have to deliver feedback in the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, although we did set a central rule around in our charter that we should deliver all our feedback in 3 weeks. But it really needs to be in time for students to receive the feedback, to read it, to understand it, have dialogue about it as required in terms of clarifying, and then to submit the next assignment with modifications. And that is possible, but is made more difficult in our own special, unique context because there are no deadlines for assignments. So students, to some extent that's good because students can delay submitting their assignment until they go through this process. To some extent it's bad because they want to take a week off being a doctor and work really hard and submit all the assignments at the same time, which doesn't work with this approach. But I don't think that would be relevant to a lot of you. So I just want to leave you with, before moving on to Gunther's talk, the point from Steve Draper here, which really resonated with us. There is no point in giving feedback to a learner unless the learner acts on it, does or something concrete and differently because of it, or thinks something concrete and differently because of it. So over to you, Gunther, or Peter actually.
Okay, thanks, Lola. I'm sure you all have some questions for Lola. What we thought we'd do is just briefly introduce the MAC process framework first, and then we'll take some questions. I've just put into the text chat some links for the MAC project. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the Making Assessment Count because we have done a previous webinar on this, and that's listed on that eventbrite.com site that I've just put into the text chat. MAC was originally developed at the University of Westminster. It was developed by a number of people, Gunther Saunders, Mark Kerrigan, who's now at Greenwich, and Mark Clements at Westminster. But it's actually been adopted as a kind of framework for making assessment count at other institutions like Cardiff Metropolitan, Greenwich, and City University. And one of the projects that I'm working on with Gunther is to actually do an evaluation of all the different implementations of it. In some ways, it shares some similarities with what Rola has been talking about. The idea is that the MAC framework is very much focused on action on feedback and encourages staff and students to engage with that action on feedback across a program. And it's also linked in, the feedback is linked into the personal tutorial system. And within the MAC framework, Gunther and Mark, the two Marks, developed this piece of eReflect. It's called eReflect software. It's an online system that helps students to strategically reflect on what they did and the feedback they received. And this is all linked into the students' reflections with the personal tutor. I'm just going to put a link into the text chat. eReflect, in fact, one of the other projects Gunther has worked on is to evolve the eReflect system into a cloud-based tool called Feedback Plus, and there's a link there which you can follow. It's essentially a cloud-based system based on Google Apps, which you can actually integrate into a VLE or an ePortfolio system to allow the eReflect system, it's like a multiple choice test system, to run and seamlessly link into other systems like a VLE or an ePortfolio. The SOS model, well, what it does is to divide sort of feedback into these three areas. So originally there's the source of the subject feedback, which is the sort of traditional type of feedback that students will get. But this is the sort of interesting area where the eReflect tool is used, and it's called operational feedback, where the student completes an online self-review questionnaire and receives an automated feedback report via email about the sort of operational aspects, how they actually approach the assignment, etc. And then the strategic feedback is much more linked into the learning journal and personal tutorial system, where the student uses the feedback from the subject and operational side and actually then updates their online journal, which is shared with the tutor and acts as the foil against which the student and tutor have a discussion. So you would get, for instance, when this framework is used throughout different modules, you get this sort of progression through a program which links the sort of the subject tutors, the student, the personal tutor, and the learning journal. So as you can see, there is many kind of links with the kinds of things that Roller at Dundee is doing. I just thought it'd be useful to put a little example of the eReflect questionnaire here. These are the pre-prepared sort of question, answers, and responses. So here's a question about when you received your coursework back, what did you do with it? And the student has to respond to one of those options, and then they'll actually get a report back listing whatever response is there. And I've just again I put in into the text chat a link to all the different questions, responses, and corresponding feedback that a couple of the universities at City and Cardiff met. And it's quite interesting actually what Cardiff University have done is to very much base common problems that students often do in coursework when they're doing their coursework. They've actually put the common problems into the eReflect thing. So they're actually getting their students to reflect on those kind of common problems before they submit their assignment to hopefully actually help them undertake a better assignment. So I'm going to hand over to Gunther now, and he's going to carry on talking about why such feed-forward approaches are important for engaging students at Westminster.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. Just the one slide, and what I've done on here really is come up with the 6 most important things that occur to me in relation to why feed-forward approaches have been important at Westminster. But also I'm drawing to some degree on what we've gathered from the other institutions that have also implemented a making assessment count approach. So the first 2 bullet points there I could discuss together, and they very much relate to what Rola was saying in her talk. Feed forward is important because it helps our students to make something of the feedback that they get. And we started the Making Assessment Count project basically because we were giving students an awful lot of feedback, and leaving aside whether it was always good feedback or not, the point is that all the evidence showed that students were probably not even reading it, never mind attempting to act on it, even if that action was to come back and say, this isn't very helpful to me. So making the most of feedback is one of those reasons that we think feed forward is so important to Westminster. And that links to developing the individual and helping them to take their feedback, work out an action, and essentially develop some sort of personal development plan for moving forward. The third bullet point on here is we underlined it earlier on because I realized it wasn't so much why something that's important directly for engaging students, but it's important to the institution because it addresses the national agenda around feedback and assessment. The fact that the NSS always tells us that students are dissatisfied with feedback and assessment. So feed forward is very important to us in trying to address that issue, and I guess indirectly therefore should be important in helping to engage students with their feedback. The fourth point on there, I've called it turning back the clock, and what we saw at Westminster, and I think they're also seeing this in some of the work at Cardiff Metropolitan, at City, using feed forward and using quite simple technology to help facilitate that feed forward activity. It's helping to link students with their work and with their tutors, or if you like, the people who've marked their work, who are not always their tutors, of course, or personal tutors. So it's helping, and I think it's important that feed forward can lead to improving the kind of academic community dialogue that we used to see much more 20 years ago or 15 years ago even in universities. So I feel that's a really important feature of feed-forward approaches, a potential feature. Again, linked to the 5th bullet point, feed-forward approaches do make use of technology generally, and I just think that's a good thing. We want our staff to use technology more. We want our students to use technology more because it's good for their future. And I think simple uses of technology in this way can be very beneficial in changing the mindset of some staff. And finally, again, coming back, the last point there comes back to something that Rola mentioned, that Peter mentioned in the slides he went through, is that feed-forward approaches can be very important in addressing modularization issues, not just ones that students experience in their minds. They compartmentalize what they do into those small packets of learning that we call modules or units. But also it's helpful in addressing the modularization issues that staff have, where they're very often, if you're in the position of being a personal tutor, you cannot easily see how one or other of your tutees is doing or performing across the piece. And the kind of feed-forward system that Making Assessment Count facilitates does potentially give personal tutors very early intelligence on how their tutees might be performing not just in one module, but across several modules. I think that's all I need to say around that slide, Peter. So back to you, I think.
Okay, thanks very much, Gunther. I actually just wondering if there are any questions before we move on to the next section. Please either put your hand up to ask in audio or type something into the text chat. I've just seen, Josie, you mentioned that it's quite interesting that you have a similar sort of SOS model, but you're using PebblePad to reflect on work-based learning. I was just going to ask Rola, because I think it's quite interesting, Rola, that you adopted the wiki approach, and for a mechanism, I think you've got a repository to sort of track the feedback and everything to do with that through for individual students. What your thoughts were when you looked at sort of the variety of technologies? Perhaps you could make a quick comment about that.
Sure, thanks, Peter. And we really needed something that, I mean, our institutional VLE is Blackboard to some extent. So we wanted to fit within that, although we did look at PebblePad, and the new PebblePad could have offered us what we wanted to do, but it would have required some customization and tailoring, and we thought that the additional expense, we thought we would give it a go with Blackboard. And actually, you know, we had initial issues with it, but since we've streamlined it, which we've done quite well, I think, considering, we've had over 85% engagement on the wiki, and it seems to be doing what we need it to do. And if I could make a comment about the portfolio thing, I mean, one of the things that the next steps we're about to do now is implement a portfolio with across the entire certificate, where they do a PDP at the beginning, and then they submit at the end a reflective piece around how they've met the exit outcomes for the course, using evidence from these journals, you know, the wiki, to evidence their learning. And I think that will be the final step in terms of just pulling it all together and creating this you know, this being able to even step out of the modularization process. But there's you know, we really did think about different ways of doing it, because we could have done the wiki actually after each module rather than after each assignment, in terms of preparing them for the next module. So it's just a matter of kind of thinking through different options, really. But Blackboard seems to be working for us at the moment, so we're going with it.
Thanks, Ro. There was also a question there, I've just put it onto the whiteboard, that Lee asked. Gunther's responded in the text chat, but how have students reacted to the changes in feedback? Do they engage with the process, or do they resent the extra work? And I suppose one could ask the same question about tutors.
I'm happy. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Rola. No, you go, Rola.
Okay. In terms of the tutors, actually, we we have now completed our tutor evaluation. We've done interviews with all the tutors involved on this, and across the board I can say that despite it taking a little bit of extra time, the tutors are satisfied, they can see the value of it, and they actually enjoy the dialogue with the students, and to see that their feedback is making a difference. So across the board, our tutors, despite having some hesitancies at the beginning, all are converted and are happy with the process. In terms of our students, it varies, as Gunther's put in there. The really good ones using it beautifully, really getting the most out of that question about what aspects of this assignment do you want feedback on specifically. In terms of quantity, even on the wiki, which at the moment is not compulsory because of this introducing the patchwork assignment, which will sort of make it compulsory in different ways. We have 85% completion rates on that, and I think that's marvelous considering it's not compulsory at the moment. But what we do need to focus on is quality of engagement, and that's the next step in this, is really educating our students around why they're doing it, and what the advantages are for them. So
okay. Thanks, Rola. Just before, I'm going to ask Gunther the same question, but it's quite interesting seeing some of the projects that are going on in the Jisc program, but some are questioning now, do we need so many summative assignments? Does there have to be a summative assignment at the end of every module? And of course there's interesting projects like the PASS project at Bradford, which is looking at the idea of focusing more on kind of program outcomes. So I think when looking at these things, it's very important to look at the whole thing, not just the formative assessment, but the summative one as well. So Gunther, could you perhaps respond to that question?
Do you mean the question around students reacting to changes in? Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to repeat what Rola has said. I think I would just add that I often do hear, when I talk to groups of staff about making assessment count, feedback plus, and what it can do, I always get asked the question, but is it the poorer students? Are they the ones that do not engage? And it tends to be the case, as Rola has said. But the only thing I want to add is that whilst that's regrettable, and it would be fabulous if one could help improve the lot of some of the students who just do not want to engage, and we should have that as a goal, I still think one shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's quite a number of good performing students who can benefit from Feed Forward and do even better. And beyond that, those students who do want to engage may well find Feed Forward processes an effective means for becoming part of a much more vibrant academic community than they could without Feed Forward processes. So I suppose in short, whilst I'm saying that the poorer students often don't engage with these things, I see that as a slightly separate issue, and one that can distract from the positive outcomes of using Feed Forward approach that I accept impact mainly on the students who are going to pass anyway.
So can I come in here and completely support what Gunther's saying, in that, one of the things is that we focus our feedback sometimes on those who are poorly performing in order to really help them kind of, really give them loads of feedback to help them across. And so the good students sometimes miss out on this issue of really helping everyone to improve is quite a nice idea. But I think in terms of maybe those who wouldn't naturally be thinking in this way, what the BOTH project I see does is it offers explicit scaffolding. So what you're doing there is you're prompting students to think of previous feedback, although they might be a bit glib in their response. You're kind of helping them at least see that that's what the feedback is there for. It is to help them kind of achieve the most out of the program and for their learning. And I think that's then for us as educators to kind of give them activities that help them to understand why educating them around why we do what we do. But then the other thing is we've been lucky in that we've implemented it across the entire program, and now for all our new students, this is just what you do. And so there's no more of the, you know, why do we have to do this sort of thing. It's just that's it across the whole program, and that's really helped us deal with any issues. And we know from our evaluation that 85% of our students think that our instructions are clear. We have screencasts, we have, you know, screeners, videos, all sorts of things, so they know how to use it, and that's been really useful as well.
Peter, have I got time to respond to that last question on the whiteboard?
Yes, please do, Gunther.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how do you cope with this with large groups? Well, I've seen three approaches. One is to just use either Feedback Plus or eReflect in its auto mode. So you present students with self-reflective questionnaires that return to them automated feedback. Whilst that's not totally satisfactory, of course, because the ideal is to get students engaging in a dialogue with academic staff or with each other, it is a way of dealing with large groups. So you could, for example, with a large group, just say, well, we're going to have a smaller number of opportunities for students to engage face-to-face around their feedback and how they're going to move forward in approaching what they do. You'll have fewer opportunities and rely more on the automatic options that the tool provides, which I accept are limited relative to what you can do face-to-face, but you can use that as an approach, and that I've seen being done quite successfully, especially in helping students to prepare for assignments as opposed to reflect on how they've done after they do an assignment. Another approach is to consider using peer support, so getting students to help each other at that reflection stage where they're discussing and talking, and that can either be peer within the year group, or in one case I've seen it where third-year undergraduates are helping first-year undergraduates. And then the third option that I see to deal with the large groups, one which I wouldn't say I've seen very often, is to change. And this comes back to whether or not you, as let's say a leader of a module or a course, see the kind of dialogue that Feed Forward provides as more valuable than time you might spend in a classroom doing things that potentially may not be helping many students, or put another way, helping many students to do something that's particularly deep and meaningful.
Okay, thanks, Gunther. I'm going to suggest we actually move on now. But just a quick last comment about it. I think one of the things about the work City University are doing with MAC is that they use peer feedback. And of course, there's David Nichols' key point about peer feedback, that the benefit is often to the student giving the feedback rather than the one receiving, because it really makes them think about the marking assessment criteria and engaging with that. I think there's also a point which I might ask Rola a little bit later, perhaps put a pointer for it. It's about when you look at staging the timeliness of feedback, it can have an impact on workloads, and perhaps not give academics, you know, a concentrated workload at very one period. I think one has to look at the spread of workload as much as the workload itself. So, but we'll perhaps pick on that up on a little bit later. We'll move on to the next section, which is about institutional experiences. And I think Rola and Gunther have just got a single slide on each one. So, but before that, perhaps if you have any experiences about designing and adopting feed-forward approaches, perhaps you could put them into the text chat. It would kind of help us share experiences. So, Rola, over to you.
Okay, so in terms of our experience, and you know, we have adopted it across our entire program, so I'm not sure if it's institutional, but we are talking to lots of different schools about what we've done, and there's lots of interest. I think for us what worked really well is that it happened at the right time in terms of linking in with our existing curriculum review, and so the staff were all kind of looking at, you know, changing assignments. We moved from paper-based to online, and so there was a lot of energy around, right, how can we do this better, and how can we design assessment and feedback that really support what we want to do. And so if you can link in with institutional activities that are going on, you know, whether it's ELIA or something else, that's a good idea. Getting buy-in from staff is really important, and the way we did that, as I said, was through firstly running a workshop on feedback and assessment, and that identified that we all had very wildly different ideas around what feedback was, and so that facilitated a conversation about, well, what should feedback achieve? And from there, you know, we kind of, lots of staff were involved in developing the process because we're a small team. That was supportive as well. But now what I can really say is that despite it adding some time for each assignment, about 5 minutes to 10 minutes for every assignment, I can say that all our tutors are supportive of the process and want it to continue, and that's because they get personal satisfaction out of seeing improvements and the feedback being used, so there's more value in it. What we've learned is that we need to communicate to students clearly what feedback is about, why there is sequencing, and that they need to think about feedback more globally rather than really being very task focused. Overall, it needs to be fundamentally, it needs to be valuable for students and staff. We gained efficiencies in order to be able to add that extra time for each staff member. We had to gain efficiencies in the system to compensate in other ways, and the way we did that is by reducing the overall number of assignments, because we were really over-assessing our students, making them the assignments more creative and more practical as well, and different. So it wasn't all essays. We were able to do different things, and that enabled us to gain efficiencies in the system. And some of our formatives, for example, are, you know, question mark perception quizzes and that sort of thing. So the feedback's automatic. And then the final thing that we really learned from this is that the process for technology has to be streamlined and simple to use for both staff and students. If we didn't manage to do that second round of streamlining, which we saw led to a big significant improvement in engagement afterwards, I think the whole process would have fallen over, and that was really important for us.
I'll try to be quick, just conscious of time, and I don't want to repeat too much of what Rhoda has said because some of these things do overlap. But I want to make the point that thinking institutionally, and not just across the institution at Westminster, but with the other institutions involved in making assessment count, getting that buy-in is really difficult, even with senior support. It's so dependent on the culture of not just an institution, but the culture of, say, a faculty or a department. Certainly I would say a key thing in reflecting on our experiences is that whatever your feed-forward approach is that you're trying to promote, it needs to be simple, and it certainly helps if it's proven. If you could show that other people are using it, ideally in the same subject area and at other institutions, that certainly helps in getting engagement. But I think the major thing to me that has really come out in the last year or so particularly is that it needs to come at the right time, and this is probably true of any initiative that you are seen to bring in a sense from outside. It needs to come at the right time when people want it, and in some respects you have to be very lucky to find that right time. But sometimes that right time is when you happen to know, maybe because you are involved centrally or peripherally, when you know that there is a related local or institutional initiative that can benefit from what you've got to bring in terms of a feed-forward approach. And certainly currently at Westminster, where our penetration in terms of making assessment count after its implementation in life sciences has been slightly disappointing. There is now a very strong institutional initiative around Learning Futures, which has a strand on feedback and assessment, and suddenly there is much more interest now within other subject areas at Westminster in the making assessment count approach. Okay, Peter, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Gunther. Oh yes, I see Clarissa, before we move on, has just put something in the text chat about a project, RF Project Kingston. That's really useful. And Clarissa, perhaps towards the end, if you would like to take the mic and perhaps briefly talk about that, that could be useful if you've got a mic working. But we'll perhaps leave that to the end. Okay, we're going to now talk about the benefits and impact. And again, in terms of activities, if you could just type into the text chat anything you see as the key benefits and impact and challenges from using feed-forward approaches, that will be helpful. So, Roland, let me hand back to you about benefits and impact and challenges.
Thanks, Peter. I've mentioned staff satisfaction already, which is really important, so I'll just skim over that. Holistic approach to learning by the students. For those who get it, I think they can really see how it makes a difference. And portfolios are increasingly being used across in medicine for all specialties, and there's talk of integrating right from an undergraduate medical student portfolio through to consultancy and beyond. So we're looking at ways of, how could you do that? How could we fit into that? But sorry, going back to so it's kind of getting them to think of themselves as an educator and how what they're learning can be used with their own students, really. And so we're role modeling a little bit of that as well. What we think we've done with this approach is that it fosters a developmental approach to feedback, and that's not just for the individual student. If I can go back to that comment about large group, what we've been able to collect from doing this dialogue and what is unclear, that question about what is unclear about the feedback, we've been able to collect that along with common mistakes we see in assignments and consolidate into a document that we put up for each module that says, these are the common problems that we see, and these are the common issues that students come across, and this is how we've addressed them. So in some respects, as Gunther mentioned, we're tackling the problem ahead of when the student does the assignment, and that's really nice. In terms of looking back at students' assignments, that's not compulsory, but it is there as an option. And I love the idea of a personal tutor, because really that would be great in terms of really getting that developmental perspective. But our numbers are not supportive of that. We have 50 new students every month. And we just don't have the staff, and that's why we've gone around that by doing this patchwork assessment at the end, and the e-portfolio with the PDP, and we're hoping that the students can then develop this developmental perspective themselves with the support of the tutors. And it closes the evaluation loop for the tutors. That's been a really big benefit as well, because we instantly know what's unclear, what's not working, and we can put that straight back into the program. So these are really some of the key benefits that we've seen in our program as a result of this.
Thanks, just perhaps you could respond to a comment by Lee from Bristol. From Andre at Portsmouth, about giving students an understanding about the purpose of feedback, because it is a key issue that a lot of students, they traditionally kind of very much focus on the mark and perhaps just doing things. Do you think there's an issue generally about having to educate students about the value and importance of feedback?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It was a big learning shock for us, because we invested our efforts into developing the process and didn't really didn't really think that we needed to educate our students about it, because we'd assumed that, you know, they were educators already and they would know. And that was a really big shock for us. So what we're developing now is actually the front end bit that should have gone in the first place around, well, what is feedback? Why are we doing this? You know, and we're using our principles that have underpinned the project. I've only shown you one of them, but there's another 3, to help them to understand why we're doing it the way we are. And we think that's going to make a really big difference in the quality of engagement. And what we're going to show them is different examples of how students have used the cover page and the wiki and what can be done with it in terms of learning. And so I think that's absolutely key.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks very much. I just want to point you to a link that Jill has put about the Southampton project, about helping tutors to improve their feedback. Definitely worth looking at that. And we're going to, in fact, there's going to be another webinar next week about analysis of feedback. And we're going to be exploring that in a little bit more detail. Gunther, over to you.
Okay, Peter. I won't go through all the points on this slide because some of them have been addressed, and also we're running a little bit short on time. But so I'll just pick out 2 which are related that I think are more potential benefits. No, that's not quite true. I think one of them is a real benefit, and I think we've seen that at Westminster, in that the feed-forward approach that Making Assessment Count has facilitated has certainly increased student-tutor dialogue. And some of that's been online, which is fine and great. The point is that the students are saying more to their tutors about what they don't understand in respect of why they've performed at a particular level and what can they do about it. That's really good, and that's something that was slightly unexpected. And I think linked to that, but more of a potential benefit, I mentioned it previously, I can see feed-forward approaches like the one that Rola's using at Dundee, like Mac, as a means to make people think about what we do with students, particularly when they start university, and whether or not dealing with the large classes, the best way of doing that is to put them in a lecture theatre and spend a lot of time talking at them. And it may well be that's not the best thing to do, certainly not for the near future. And in fact, we may get better value out of spending our valuable staff resources on trying to engage students in these kinds of activities of reflection around the work, not just that they've done, but around the work that they're planning to do as well. So, Peter, I think I'll stop there, and people can read the other points on the slide if they wish to.
Okay, thanks, Gunther. Because of my appalling timekeeping, we're kind of running out of time. So perhaps rather than just have questions now, we'll do the last 2 slides and then open up to some of the questions. So again, Rola, shall I hand over to you?
Peter, you know, I probably mentioned this all already, and I was thinking, okay, so what are the key things that, the challenges that we experience, the barriers we experience? I think timeliness is really important in terms of feedback. Peter, you wanted me to talk about how do you manage workloads. For us, you know, we have this unwieldy model of no deadlines, rolling on and off enrollments, which complicates our life immensely. And I don't think that people who have normal cohorts would have a lot of the issues that we do. So I think you can actually plan workload around it, because you know, the dialogue loops, you'd be surprised actually. We thought there'd be loads of them that happen with students. What we found is they tend to naturally peter out after 1 or 2 dialogue loops on the wiki, and that's that. Students not understanding feed-forward, I've mentioned. Tutors not understanding feed-forward. Yes, to both of these, and helping develop both students and tutors and their understanding of feed-forward is really important. Sequencing of assignments is crucial. And finally, technology. It really needs to be simple, and these are our key messages really for making this work.
Okay, Peter, everybody, the points on this slide really are what I've I'm drawing on the experience not so much at Westminster actually, but on what I've seen in trying to work with many people to try to get making assessment count picked up at other institutions. So the different cultures of institutions I mentioned previously, they can be bewildering and can make a huge difference between whether you're able to see one person pick up the approach you're offering or 10 or 20 or even more than that. So the different cultures are often a big barrier. The use of non-mainstream tools and systems. We developed eReflect initially for part of making assessment count. It's a little system built in something that lives outside of core systems that institutions use. That's probably actually, in retrospect, not the best approach. The best approach is to have something that can integrate with the VLEs that are so often, well, I think universally central to what institutions do around e-learning and online learning. Linked to that are compliance issues. I find compliance issues incredibly boring. We have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis, and one has to be very careful, especially when you're using non-mainstream tools and systems, that they do comply with the law around data protection and privacy issues. And that's been an issue for us in trying to get things off the ground in other institutions. Very variable, but in some cases almost impenetrable problems. I think in terms of enabling, working through individuals at institutions who have a wide role is often beneficial. So rather than approaching an institution through maybe a single academic contact, look for somebody that's in a learning and teaching development unit or has some central role in supporting e-learning or online learning. And then the last 2 points I've got here are about dissemination and how using as many dissemination approaches as you can is really important, because people are so busy these days. We run webinars regularly at Westminster. We might only get 3 or 4 people turning up, but it's worth it just to get them, because they haven't actually tuned into what you're doing through the other dissemination mechanisms that you've been using. And the last point I want to make, I've written there, is human connectors. What's been really important for me in making assessment count has been the connections between what's happening at different institutions that critical friends can make, like Peter Chatterton. I noticed that Sarah Chesney, who's in the audience, is also a critical friend on another project that I'm working on. And I think their capability to actually network in a sense for you is tremendously valuable when you try to actually put it bluntly, sell what you think is a great idea and sell something that's having a real impact around the institution that you're working in. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks you, Peter.
Thanks, Gunther. I think I'll perhaps ask you afterwards when the session finishes. I'm intrigued by your images you're using, your slides, and try to work out the relevance.
I'm trying to work out the relevance as well, Peter.
Okay. I'd just like, before we move on to the questions, I'd just like to do a little poll. There's the question. Could you respond to that? I suspect you probably all know what how to do it. Will you be looking at feed-forward approaches in your institution? So you've got yes, no, we already are, maybe, or other. So I think it'd be useful to, could you respond to that before we move on? It'd be interesting to see. Amanda's already are. Lots of C's kind of coming up. Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, please use, as Marianne says, please use the voting buttons. It's just above the list of names. You can see that. It's got a little A icon on it. Okay, I'll publish those to the thing, so that's encouraging. Yeah, so the answer is yes. A sort of, and C we already are. Well, that's really, so that's 36%. That's really good. Okay, let's move on to kind of questions. First of all, would anyone like to take the microphone and ask a question or make a comment? I'm just trying to look back. Marianne, perhaps you could help me. Are there any questions I've missed that we could actually ask Rola and Gunter to respond to.
Hi Peter, I think you've done a great job of picking those up as we've gone along. There's been some interesting, I think, comments and responses to Gunter and Rola's approaches and experiences, which I think will be useful to capture the text chat on that. So I can make sure we do that and share that. And I think particularly, examples of where people can see it fitting into their initiatives as well. So no other questions that I can see, but certainly some interesting comments there.
Look, I think the thing I'll take from this, I must do better on the timekeeping, so apologies for that. But we've run over about 5 minutes. Oh, Sarah has asked a question. Has giving and receiving feedback been? That's a really interesting question. Actually, Sarah, the reason I think that's such an interesting question is because like David Bode's, David Nichols' idea of having sort of graduates when learners graduate, that they're able to be kind of rather independent self-reviewers. My concern is that when graduates go out into the workplace, they haven't got the formality of a tutor kind of support, so they're a little bit reliant on getting feedback from their peers, their managers, the people kind of they work with. And I think that's actually a different type of skill when you've actually got to be able to go out and actually get feedback, ask for it, interpret it, because interpreting is very important. It requires perhaps a fair degree of communication skills. So I often think we should be equipping the graduates with those kinds of skills to be able to get that kind of feedback out of the normal kind of educational environment. Maybe Rola and Gunter, I could ask you to respond to Sarah's question. Hello, Rola.
My only response. Oh, go on, Rola.
Sorry, Gunter. I was just typing it into the chat. That's why I kind of was a bit slow to respond, but I don't need to now. And our students are postgraduate medical educators, and absolutely giving and receiving feedback is an important skill for them, and that's an explicit skill in our program.
Good talk.
Nothing much to add, Peter. I agree with that entirely, and agree with what you said as well. It's an interesting thing for me to take back, actually, and talk to other people about at Westminster. We perhaps don't make enough of the fact that that some of our students are actually very good at giving feedback.
And actually, can I make another point? When we work with the undergraduate programs, and I know some undergraduate programs doing really good work in the health professions, in transition blocks around teaching students to give feedback as well as to receive it, and that idea of putting them in that giving feedback, making them kind of give feedback, helps them to understand some of the difficulties around it, and hopefully makes them more receptive to being able to receive it as well. Yeah.
I know it's just interesting. I've had some experiences just very recently where one of the students I mentor on a year in industry scheme, and she was being given feedback by a supervisor who had some real sort of personality problems with the students and rather kind of resented her, and she was giving awful feedback. And so this idea of being able to interpret and contextualize feedback from people like your supervisors, managers, is terribly important. Okay, I think probably we ought to finish there. Apologies, Marianne, that we've kind of going off, and many thanks, Rola and Gunter, for that. I thought that was a super session, and thanks, Marianne, for arranging it.
Hi Peter, and thanks to you, Gunter and Rola, for an excellent session, really interesting, and sorry we've got to end it there. I think there's a lot of food for thought, and great to see so many positive comments about it. So thanks to everybody as well for joining and for participating. Some really good questions and ideas have come through. we'll share the recording after the session with a link to the slides, etc. And we'll also include details of the session that Peter mentioned next Monday on analysis of feedback, which I think will be an excellent sort of follow-up to this, and I know that Rola will also be joining us for that. So thanks again, everybody. Just make sure that you fully exit the room when you go, and that way we'll be able to make the recording available as soon as possible. So thanks again, and hope to see you back at one of our future sessions. Bye, everyone.